Diffusion, the international science radio show.
We have a bouncer on the doors of perception.
The good, the bad, the ugly.
It gets pretty exciting.
The myths, the truths.
Toxicology.
Astroseismology.
Magnetism. The dark side.
Genetically engineered potatoes.
Planetoid.
Planetoid.
I love that word.
Hello and welcome to Diffusion. Sit back and relax while we plant the seeds of weird and wonderful science directly into your imagination. I'm Ian Woolf. On this special economics edition, I speak with molecular biologist Alex Kelly about automation, investment, and how to change things for a better society. The dismal science. Economics is the science of how to distribute scarce resources. What happens if most consumers become unemployed due to automation? And what happens if technology provides the ability to produce enough for everybody to live a wealthy life? Abundance instead of scarcity. I spoke with Alex Kelly, who as an entrepreneur has a stake in competitive capitalism, as the manager of a non-profit organisation has an interest in cooperation, and as a molecular biologist, Alex has a scientific perspective. Alex is a lab manager at the Biofoundry at the Australian Innovation Centre. He's recently graduated with a Commerce Science degree from the University of New South Wales. Alex is passionate about open science and open economics. I began by asking him if the vast majority of jobs are being automated and the new jobs are much fewer and lower paid, how will people live?
My favourite way of explaining this to non-economics people is to sort of imagine it as the size of the economic pie that everyone's creating is getting bigger every single year through capital equipment, but the amount of chefs required to create that pie is significantly decreasing. And how one determines distribution of income in this system, let alone distribution of meaning and access to meaningful work, is going to be a really interesting question. Especially you want to look at the low-skill, low-paying jobs that are going to be automated out in the next decade. So this is people working in retail, this is people working in trucking and shipping, people working in warehouse management, people working in law firms and accounting firms. Anyone who's doing a job that's more easily automated, doesn't require as much critical thinking on the spot, that's where we're going to see the most pain in the next decade.
We're a really wealthy group of people on the earth at the moment in mass, but of course it's not evenly distributed. In fact, it's distributed into smaller and smaller a number of hands every year. We're projecting at the moment, it's what? You've got less than 100 people own more than half the wealth in the world, despite the fact it's more wealth every year, and that gets smaller and smaller every year. People are projecting in 10 years' time, Jeff Bezos might own everything.
That's extremely correct. I think part of the challenge is that we're still dealing with national sovereignty under 1900s definitions. And so in a world where we allow incorporation of companies and they are allowed to operate over state lines, it then becomes really hard to determine where the sovereignty of taxation ends up and which states are bearing the burden of the creation of that wealth. And so a lot of people are arguing that the state should be playing a smaller and smaller role as time goes on. I see benefits to that, but I can also see the fact that that would just lead us towards a world where the Jeff Bezos, the Amazons, the Microsofts, the Googles of the world, they are the new state in this system. And so how do we get around that? How do we avoid that becoming the new future? It may be done legislatively or it could be done economically if you can think of a correct way of redistributing and ensuring that the economic system doesn't end up with just a few people at the top with all of the wealth. I've heard capitalism described as a trading game, and the thing about trading games is that eventually there is a winner. You always end up having aggregation, movement towards a single person accumulating all of the wealth. And so without some way of resetting the players in the trading game, those who fall to zero and then are no longer able to participate in the trading game, you end up with a more and more disenfranchised, a larger and larger group of people who are unable to afford the cost of living, or let alone the ability to try and aspire to something greater.
On the one hand, you've got all these people who need to have enough to live on. On the other hand, you've got an ever-increasing amount of wealth being generated. Sort of seems like a problem and its own solution.
You can create all of this additional wealth and all of this additional value, but if you don't have the institutions available to be able to redistribute it and ensure that it's constantly being pumped back into the system, if you give an extra $1 million to a billionaire like Jeff Bezos, he's not going to go and spend that extra $1 million back in the economy. It's going to go into a savings account, or it's going to go into shares, which will generate a dividend, which will be used to purchase more shares. None of which actually empowers individual consumers, empowers small business, or allows anyone else to actually have a share of the pie. And so you don't want to have institutions like tax systems that have a negative impact on people's aspirations or wish to create value. That's a serious issue. But on the same token, if there are many, many individual players who just flat out can't participate in the economic system, then that itself is a negative impact. So you have to try and find some kind of balance between the two. And I found the dogged approach of neoliberals and neoconservatives to try and let the free market handle everything really has left us in a state where it's handled nothing.
If less and less people have more and more money, it breaks the economy because there's no consumers to buy the things that they are manufacturing and selling, if they are in fact the employers and the manufacturers and sellers. So that breaks the economy, and it all falls down because there's no consumers left. Mm-hmm. Everyone's automated out of a job, so no one can afford to buy the cars or anything else. Like, Ford worked out that he needed to pay his employees enough to buy the cars that they were making.
Exactly.
Not only so he had consumers, but also a perfect advertisement. This is the car that I made. You can buy one too. But that's not where we're heading. We're heading for a world where most people are unemployed permanently and in dire poverty, so they can't buy anything.
And not to mention the fact that the sheer wish to even own a car is probably going to soon be out of their reach. Most people living paycheck to paycheck in this day and age, and to be able to save up for a car is out of the question. So what do? They go and they participate in a car sharing platform, and they begin to participate in the use of communal goods, which is itself indicative of a society that's trying to find a way out. It's trying to find a different approach. And there is a certain value to that, because where capitalism encourages and enhances the role of individual purchases and owning your own equipment, your own capital goods, if people can't afford that, they look for an alternative. And so these sharing platforms and these communal goods seem more and more attractive the more and more they slip down the economic system.
If the extremely wealthy minority, the 0.01%, own all the robots or the automation, then they don't need an economy. They can just get the factories to supply them with the goods, and to hell with everyone else. It's the end of society. It's the end of economics. Basically, that's one extreme, which is why maybe it would be better if we had public ownership of robots as well.
Or some kind of dividend off the processes that robots use to create value. It's a recurring theme that you can see throughout history, though, and if you'll allow a bit of a social faux pas, we'll sort of compare the automation with robots here in today's day and age with the rapid expansion of the slave enterprise of the Roman Empire. And you saw an extremely similar thing where previously smallhold landholders made up the majority of the Roman Empire's middle class, the people who actually bought the goods, who farmed the land and who served in the armies. But as more and more slaves were captured and brought home, and more wealth was accumulated in the Roman Empire, a smaller and smaller group of people began to accumulate larger and larger amounts of land resources. And as a result, the people who previously farmed the land didn't have any form of income, so they were forced into becoming career soldiers rather than farmers who went off and served in the army every now and again. And they no longer had any place to call their own. They no longer served as a valuable tool within the economy. And soon before they knew it, Rome had become a welfare state where if you weren't employed actively by the state, you were living off a grain dividend that was given to you. And the same can almost be seen in today's day and age. As we disenfranchise more and more people from being able to participate in the economic system, they get locked into a cycle of being on welfare. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with being on welfare, but there is something soul-destroying about not being able to use your inherent value as an individual to participate to a society. And that hurts inside, whether or not it's something which you consciously feel or unconsciously feel.
You can't be an entrepreneur unless you've got money to live on from family or from previous income from somewhere, because unemployment won't pay for it.
I'm only on here by virtue of my parents supporting my lifestyle. I could never have helped run and set up this community lab if it wasn't for the fact that I was being supported by them, and for that I'm an incredibly grateful human being. The real challenge of this is that it's not only odd and seemingly arbitrary that those that have money then determine where all investment goes. It's actually really inefficient. One of the most powerful financial tools in developing countries is actually microfinance. Here's a thought experiment. What do you think would generate more money? $1 million worth of investment into a random company that is going to invest in the Great Barrier Reef, Malcolm Turnbull, or $1,000 investments into university students with each with an excellent idea that they could pursue and then build up to a business idea? Sure, you're going to have to put more money into them once those ideas are more developed, but by investing each of those sets of $1,000, you've drastically increased the chance that that person is going to generate additional value for the economy. So when you ask yourself, what would I rather put my government-funded taxation dollars into? Would I rather it go into the pockets of people who are making a existing company run, or would I rather put it into the pockets of smart thinkers who are going to create new businesses and ideas? It seems like a really, really obvious choice. But it's not how the current economy directs its investment. And I think that that in itself is something which we need to address institutionally rather than with saying, well, the free market's going to handle it, because it clearly hasn't.
You're listening to Ian Woolf on Diffusion Science Radio. Send emails to science@diffusionradio.com. We're brought to you across Australia on the Community Radio Network, and podcast over the internet on www.diffusionradio.com. So if I have a really good idea and I have even the skills to back it, too bad. There's nothing I can do with that. The best I can do is apply to some accelerator seed programs and hope that a wealthy person likes my idea and decides that the organisation should give me some backing. And they might pay for me to live frugally for a year and give me some mentoring, and perhaps I could start my business. But otherwise, if I don't get into that, and that's very selective and very few people get in, the whole idea of entrepreneurs trying out a new idea, going into business, succeeding or not, it's just impossible unless you've already got capital. And how do you already have capital? You inherit it. Or you're one of the tiny fraction of a percent that happen to have lucky connections at the right time to capitalize on your ideas because you knew somebody.
It's a little bit tragic when you see serially failed entrepreneurs who are onto their 10th project and they're still gaining very, very large amounts of investment, and then sitting in the wings are dozens of people with their own ideas who have never managed to actually attract it. You have to ask yourself, maybe a more egalitarian system that allows more people to step forward and take the mantle of team leader would allow for a greater variety of ideas and hopefully more success in the long term, rather than continuously investing in people who have failed to generate additional value. That's not to say that once an entrepreneur has failed to launch a business, that's it for them, it's all done, but it should allow for track record to mean something and matter more than access to funds.
And then a universal basic income has been suggested as a solution, but some critics have warned that if the government controls universal basic income, rich people could just lobby them to lower it every year so that you're totally constrained by it, just like you would be on unemployment benefits.
Well, we can't fix the problem of lobbying in government overnight. There's no doubt about that. And as long as money weighs into politics, we're going to have an issue there. And I think that's probably more of an issue of representative democracy and something which could be solved through direct democracy than something which we really need to address on the same platform as basic income. So if we take aside negative lobbying and just look at it as an individual policy platform, there is a lot of value to it, and there are some good negatives. So let's look at some of the values. A really good quote from our friend Andrew Yang in America, who is running for the 2020 election, #Yang 2020. One of his points is that it's capitalism where the starting point is not zero. When you play a game of Monopoly, every time you pass go, you collect a small amount of money, and that money comes from what is the effective central bank in that system, and that money then immediately goes back into the economy. It goes to the bank in the purchase of property, it goes to the bank in the paying of bills because you've landed on a war chest. One of the really common misconceptions of basic income is that money is immediately lost as soon as it goes into the pockets of the individuals it's handed to. Whereas that's actually much more true of a tax refund given to the wealthiest 1%, because those people have already spent all of their money on their needs and the greater majority of their wants. If they're going to spend money on a want, it's going to be an ostentatious display of wealth. It's not going to be an upgrade for their smartphone, which is starting to die because the battery is running out. A person who is living paycheck to paycheck, who receives $1,000, is immediately sticking that money back into the economy, and that money is going to shop owners, it's going to seamstresses, it's going to laundromats, it's going to all the little things that helps make the economy run. And yes, probably about 60% is going straight back into Jeff Bezos' wallet. But if we've got an actually functioning taxation system that's collecting money on that, then that money will be able to continue to circle around. Money doesn't have an inherent value. It's a medium of exchange. And so if we're not using it as a medium of exchange, then what good is it? Money sitting in a bank vault doesn't help anyone. It doesn't generate value, and it doesn't lift anyone out of poverty. And capitalism as a rising tide that lifts all boats only functions if you continue to put more water into the system. We're coming to a time where scarcity in a lot of our goods is becoming a thing of the past. We were terribly afraid that we were going to run out of food as a resource, but it's quickly becoming apparent that we're going to be able to feed the world's population and then some, especially if we manage to figure out our supply chain management. So people see real estate in valuable cities like Sydney as being a valuable investment, not because there's some inherent value in an apartment block in the middle of King's Cross, but because that's something which only a limited amount of people can get access to. And so you, as an investor with $1 million, say, well, I would much rather have this and gain a guaranteed 15% of my investment than put that money into 1,000 entrepreneurs that could then go and create potential businesses for me, because a lot of that money is going to be lost. Now, one of those outcomes is beneficial to the individual, and one of those outcomes is not beneficial to the individual. One of those outcomes is beneficial to society as a whole, and one of those outcomes is not beneficial to society as a whole. And the problem is that those goals do not align, and as an operator in the free market, the individual is going to go for the option which empowers them financially every single time. So we need to try and find a way to address the fact that there isn't a perceived value in investing in intellectual startups and in the capital of university students, because if that can be perceived as something which is itself a worthy investment, then people will choose to do that. Universal basic income is one such option where you're institutionally mandating that money shall be shifted away from investment in low value products such as real estate and into high value products for the economy such as startups. So I suppose one thing you got to remember, and I like to use America as a microcosm because the entire world has got their eyes fixed right on them. But you must remember that Donald Trump wasn't elected in a vacuum. He wasn't elected for no reason whatsoever. He was elected by an extremely disenfranchised working population who perceived him as their way out, as their way to scream out to Washington, D.C. that the current economic and political system is not working for them. And so, looking forward towards the 2020 election without some kind of legal fiasco blowing up in Trump's face, he is still looking like their best option as a working class population to fight back against a system which they believe is not working for them. So then we have to look at, well, what are his opponents offering and bringing on the table? And that's where I found Andrew Yang's platform extremely convincing, because it actually seems to unite a lot of people across the political divide, where people are saying, well, we have our social and opinionated differences, but when it comes down to the fact that we're all individually living paycheck to paycheck, we're all living on the same precipice, we can all agree that stepping away from that precipice is a good thing. And so handing everyone a universal basic income, finding a way to redistribute income away from those extremely wealthy 1% and back down towards the bottom, and ensure that because we know that trickle-down economics doesn't work. It's been proven throughout the 90s and the 2000s and even now into 2018, 2019, where we're still looking at economic policies in Australia and America that rely entirely upon money drifting down from the top to the bottom, which it doesn't do. We know that. Capitalism is a trading game. You don't win a trading game by trading to people who have no money. Those people are out of the trading game. So that's why I see Yang 2020's platform as being extremely convincing and being a kind of centralized, simple topic that can unite voters across a political divide, regardless of their social views or what side of the economic compass they stand on. I think the favourite part of my platform is it says not left, not right, but forward, because it addresses the fact that we're still looking at a socio-economic and political compass that has only got 4 points on it at the most, when really it needs to have about 80 points. So I don't know whether a universal basic income itself is going to be the answer to our political and economic woes. I just know that if we continue down this path, we're going to be looking at some form of social revolution. AI and automation have already driven many people out of their jobs, but we haven't seen anywhere near the full impact. That's going to be felt in the next 5 to 10 years. So, as a previous American president has said, I believe it was John F. Kennedy, said that those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable. And that rings extremely true today, because if we continue down this path, we've already seen riots, we've already seen violence in the streets. Australian school children are walking out of their schools today because of their opinions on the climate. And if we continue down this path, we're going to see more and more instances of violence. So I think that it's really important for us to address this before it becomes a bigger problem.
Well, Alex, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ian.
That was molecular biologist Alex Kelly, lab manager at the Biofoundry at the Australian Innovation Centre.
High-speed machinery goes in, but men like you and me go out.
Yes, machines come in and men go out. Everywhere the same story. These whirring wheels spinning faster, ever faster. A mighty crescendo of production. They typify a constantly changing industry, an industry that ever seeks to do its appointed work cheaper and quicker and better.
New machines, high-speed production, fewer jobs, and 10 men for every job that can be had.
We have made a large investment in labor-saving machinery. It is giving us a bigger output at a large saving in labor costs. But the fact is we are not selling the additional output the new machines are giving us. Our inventories are mounting, and that cannot continue long if we are to remain solvent.
The truth is, I guess, that the people just can't afford to buy. They can't afford to pay our price.
At the same time, I do think the key to the problem
is to expand our market. In my opinion, though, that will only happen when we get a little more prosperity and wages go up all over the country. Then most everybody could afford to buy our product.
Why not start the ball rolling by raising wages in our own plant right now?
Why bring that up again? It wouldn't be a drop in the bucket. Besides, we'd probably go broke.
How shall these conflicting factors be arranged to provide better living, more enjoyment of the good things of life, and abundance for all? And so we find our problem at the crossroads. Broad highways leading in all directions. Which way shall we take?
That was from Machine, Master or Slave, produced in 1941. I produced Diffusion, which is broadcast around Australia to 28 stations on the Community Radio Network, including 2RBM in the Blue Mountains of New South Wales, 8CCC in Alice Springs and Tennant Creek, 2MVR in Nambucca Valley, 3MBR in the Mallee Border districts of Victoria and South Australia, City Park Radio 7LTN in Launceston, Tasmania, 2XXFM in Canberra, and my local station, 2RDJ in Burwood, New South Wales. Diffusion is syndicated globally on the National Science Foundation's Science 360 internet radio station and also on astronomy.fm. Subscribe to the podcast on the Diffusion website, www.diffusionradio.com. That's www.diffusionradio.com. Check the website for links, photos and videos about this week's show. If you enjoyed the show, then explore more than 950 previous episodes, archived on diffusionradio.com, where the shows are labelled by keywords so you can focus in on the stories you want to hear. Join my patrons at patreon.com/diffusionradio. Make a donation through paypal.me/Ian Woolf. Subscribe to the Diffusion YouTube channel at youtube.com/c/diffusionradio. I'm Ian Woolf. Join us inside your audio device of choice for more science wondering next week on Diffusion Science Radio.
Science is fun. It helps you to learn, to know, and to appreciate. When you study science, you may go on field trips. You discover the marvelous interrelationships between all living things. You learn to read the history of the Earth as it is written in rocks and fossils. You find out what makes things tick, everything from a molecule to a living organism. In the study of science is found the most useful and satisfying knowledge of man. Knowledge of his physical world, its past, its present, and its future. And in your moments of relaxation, now and in the years to come, you will find the study of science leading you into fascinating pursuits. Photography, collecting. Why study science? Study science because you will find in the study of science a richer, more rewarding life.